Hey there, guys. Welcome to the channel. So in a perfect world, we'd imagine journalists to be some of the most enlightened, well-informed people out there. But the reality check, is that always the case? Is that even usually the case nowadays? So from what we've seen, no, that is not the case. And if it's not usually the case, it is probably not ever the case. And it feels like many of the mainstream media, they fall into this, repetitive echo chamber. This is how they all end up, basically beating the same drum at the same time all the time. And the irony, sometimes the most vocal critics of the media also find themselves a part of it. Take Barry Weiss, for example. You guys may recognize her name. She was in the New York Times for a long time, and she left for ethical reasons, she said, and she was mentioned in the Twitter files and talked about on Capitol Hill by those so-called journalists. And I was actually impressed with her when she did leave the Times, saying it was because of ethical concerns, almost like a virtue signal on my behalf. I just read it and I didn't look into it. I just thought, hey, that's awesome. She was probably full of it. Who knows? Tricks on me. But even with that, she still seems to basically epitomize the issues that most people have with the mainstream media. Many journalists these days, they just parrot what's popular, especially what's discussed in their elite circles. These fancy parties they go to in Washington and that stuff. And she shows us this, just because we say a thing doesn't mean that we even know what it means. This talking to the media, and this is actually people. And I want to show you what I'm talking about. I was watching some Joe Rogan, and I found one where Weiss basically gets grilled. And I think it's perfect representation of the problems many of us see with the media today. So who's Barry Weiss? So she's actually decorated, man. 2021 Daniel Pearl Award winner, and was labeled the Times star opinion writer by Vanity Fair. So on paper, she's top tier. But in practice, I think we're going to see exactly what she is. So is Weiss really some beacon of journalistic integrity that the world suggests? Or just another piece of this terrible media machine? You guys take a look at this. But before we do, guys, thanks to everyone who's been subscribing. Really appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please help us with the algorithm. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, share the channel. Every time you do, a leftist loses their wings.
Kirsten
Tulsi
Gillibrand. Oh, monstrous.
Monstrous?
Ideas.
Well, when she was 22, she had...
No, she's an Assad toady.
What does that mean?
She is
What's a toady?
I think that I used that word correctly. Jamie, can you check what toady means?
Like towing the line? Is that what it means?
No, I think it's like a... Toadie.
What does that mean?
I think it means what I think it means.
Toady. Definition of toadies. A person
A
who
sycophant,
flatters or defers to others
I
for
kinda used it right.
self-serving reasons.
A sycophant.
So she's an Assad sycophant. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's known about her.
Like, what did she say that,
We have to look.
qualifies her?
I don't remember the details.
We
I've read
probably
it.
should say that before we say that about her. We should probably read it, rather.
Well, I have read it.
No, I mean, we should right now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Just so we know what she said.
Look up
I've had her
Tulsi
on
Gabbard.
here before.
Look
and I
up
really enjoyed talking to her. I like her a lot.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I like talking to her.
Okay,
I like
okay.
talking to her. I don't know about...
I think she's like the motherlode of bad ideas.
Whoa.
I'm pretty positive about that, especially on Assad, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong.
So is it just me, or is it not comically disappointing? When you see someone like Barry Weiss, who's hailed as like the mainstream media's best, struggle over something so simple, struggle like that, you realize that there might be some truth to this whole echo chamber criticism. She's lost when defining a term that she literally just said. And all she was doing was regurgitating what she's heard in these elite circles, rather than literally understanding even the word that she's using, understanding or even internalizing it. And it's clear when Joe Rogan, who's genuinely friendly with Tulsi Gabbard and respects her, pushed back on Weiss's comments, she fumbled. Tell us more than any words she ever could have said by those actions, And all it was a repeated soundbite. She was just repeating sound bites. It was not even her real belief. And the hilarious thing is, this looks like the first time that anyone ever asked her to explain any of the goofy stuff that she says. And I imagine, they usually just chuckle to each other and nod and good. But it reminds me of a pretty awesome debate moment in 2022. If you guys remember, I'm sure you do, Tulsi Gabbard called out Kamala Harris's prosecutorial past and all the smoking weed while locking up people for weed. And instead of addressing it head on, Harris went for the "you're friends with Assad" angle. A cheap shot, a total misdirection, the lamest thing in the book, but it worked, And Pete Buttigieg, of course, everyone's favorite transportation secretary, I think that's what he is, used the same tactics. So everyone's sticking to the Get Tulsi playbook.
One of the foreign leaders you mentioned meeting was Bashar al-Assad. I have, in my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
Congresswoman Gabbard, let me allow you to respond.
Thank you. You were asked directly whether you would send our troops to Mexico to fight cartels, and your answer was yes. The fact checkers can check this out. No. But your point about judgment is absolutely correct. Our commander-in-chief does need to have good judgment. And what you've just pointed out is that you would lack the courage to meet with both adversaries and friends to ensure the peace and national security of our nation. I take the example of those leaders who have come before us, leaders like JFK, who met with Khrushchev, like Roosevelt, who met with Stalin,
like Donald Trump,
Reagan, who met.
It's freaking baffling, man, how the media, especially certain Democratic commentators, they keep harping on Tulsi Gabbard's stance on Syria without really getting into any of the details. And they treat it as if she committed some huge, irredeemable political sin. What did she actually do? She took a diplomatic trip to Syria in 2017 and met with al-Assad and engaged in some kind of dialogue that I'm sure she hoped would maybe somehow bring a way to end a freaking war. That's it. Yet they've somehow spun it into her being some Assad supporter, despite her clear, multiple times labeling him a brutal dictator. She chose a diplomatic approach rather than a confrontational one. It's a foreign policy perspective, not an endorsement. Pete Buttigieg's dig, trying to conflate Gabbard's approach to Syria with Trump's dealing with North Korea, was petty. And come on, why is diplomacy with a hostile nation negative? Didn't Trump manage some pretty significant diplomatic breakthroughs with North Korea, as Gabbard pointed out during Tucker Carlson?
It was meeting with Assad, which I thought was great. I mean, Assad, whatever. I'm not endorsing Assad, but he did protect religious minorities, including Christians. I'm a Christian. Christian leaders in the region say that. You have a right to make that point. They haven't let you make that point or any point. They just dismiss you because of that. We don't have much time, but I'm just interested, what is that about? It's bizarre.
It is a dangerous situation that we are in, that so many people here in Washington who are part of this powerful elite, who have this stranglehold over the foreign policy establishment, are so afraid of diplomacy. And they cast out people like me who are calling for a foreign policy focused on cooperation and diplomacy rather than confrontation as something weird or bad or to be suspicious of. When you look at so many leaders throughout our country's history who have made those tough decisions to exercise diplomacy to prevent our country from unnecessarily going to war.
So yeah, pretty clear differences in foreign policy perspective. On one hand, there's this approach, like people like Donald Trump, people like Tulsi Gabbard, they want diplomacy, they want engagement, they want to talk. And their stance is that, even with adversaries, dialogue is always more effective than war. The logic, how can any reasonable person argue with that? It's so straightforward. Why not try diplomacy and potentially avoid deaths? How can this not make sense to people? And on the other side of that, there's this stance we see, and sadly we see it now, from both parties. Endless wars, military spending. I'm not against military spending, but some of it's egregious. Aggressive postures against countries like what we're seeing with Ukraine and Russia right now. It's a policy direction that's led to numerous innocent lives lost, just like pawns on a chessboard, man. And being against war does not make you a puppet of Putin, no matter how many times they say it. Anyway, so Barry Weiss, to me, she exemplifies what's become an issue in all of journalism. And she's got accolades, but despite that, her showing up on Joe Rogan just showed a serious deficiency in her own understanding of the things that she actually believes. And at least her ability to articulate what she believes. And I think she, like most of her profession, they're better equipped at just parroting mainstream narratives rather than actually talking about them. You know, and I don't mean to pick on her. I'm really not. You know, I actually believe that she's one of the better journalists, which is freaking terrifying. And my point is that we're in absolute real trouble because she is one of the better journalists. And if these are the types of people giving us the information we need to make up our minds about things that are important, things that we expect from our government, we're effed. Anyway, guys, that's just my take. Let me know yours in the comments. And please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, share the channel. We'll see you in the next one.